You make your choices. And again, where I think my father's generation after post-World War II, movies, at least in the States, were much more about good guys and bad guys, white hats and black hats, villains and heroes. And I think my generation, coming out of the 60s, in which the Vietnam War had played a large point in our lives, and the ambivalence and the mistake of being there, the question of protesting against the war in our country, I think I was affected about what's the right decision. And so I was attracted to characters, in most cases, not always, but sort of every man that you could identify with, who was put in an impossible situation, with a terrible situation, whether it was a crazy woman with a knife, or walking across Los Angeles, and how they would react, and dealing with how they would be received. Would they make the right decision, a positive decision, or would they make an evil and bad decision? And I guess I learned early on, well, actually it was in Fatal Attraction, and we were watching the first screenings, and I just had this affair with Glenn Close the night before, and I come back to my apartment, and I get in my bed, which is made up. I get in my bed to mess it up, to look like I had slept there that night. And the audience laughed. And Sherry Lansing, my producing partner, she turned to me and said, "I can't believe it. The audience has forgiven you already." So I guess I had this ability that audiences forgave you, or at least they understood. You put the character in such a dilemma that they could understand that dilemma. When we came to France, I remember with Fatal Attraction, and we came to promote it to France, and my French press said, "Well, in France we all have mistresses. This is not a big deal here in France. We have mistresses and all the same." "Oh, okay, fine." The movie was a big hit. Every French wife took her husband to that movie and said, "Sit down here. Just want you to know this is what can happen." So, there you go.
Did you take a look at the TV show that they're doing now about Fatal Attraction?
No, I looked at some of the comments.
Doing a pretty good job with it. I was going back to Falling Down, which is a movie that fascinates me, and when I first of all because your performance is incredible in it, bravo, and also because it's kind of a visionary movie. I mean, the scene when you talk, I think it's very first in the army supply shop. This talk, we heard that a lot on news channels before the Trump election. It was, your character is probably kind of a plan, something that will happen in the future. There was a lot of those people that angry white men that arrived after the generation, the Trump generation, as I call them. Do you see that? Was it some kind of a visionary movie, even if it didn't want to be?
It was a really good script. It was a really solid script. And it was interesting because it's hard to remember, but back in those earlier years, Southern California was the military-industrial complex center of our country. More than show business and studios, it was the military-industrial complex. And the idea of this character called Defense, a patriotic man who had given his life to work in the military-industrial complex, and now the Cold War was over, and they had succeeded, and now they didn't need him anymore. And here was a man who could not accept the fact regarding his personal problems with his wife and separation, who could not believe it. He'd given his life for his country in a supportive way, and then they did not need him. And so that was the crux of it, and then in a traffic jam, having a breakdown, walking across the country. Well, we had a lot of different incidences. Certainly with the weaponry was one of them. And another one was there was a scene where he goes into a Korean grocery store and he wants to get some change. And then he has to buy something to get the change. And the next thing you know, he flips out and demolishes the store. Anyway, the movie comes out a while later, and I get a call from the studio. I said, Michael, could you come down to the studio? We need to talk to you. And I came down to the studio, and I went in the room, and they introduced me. I don't remember his name. It was Mr. Loh, who was the chairman of the Korean American Grocers Association, who had a real bone to pick with me about the portrayal of Korean grocers in the story. And I remember saying, well, excuse me, if there's a reason why the author took this, because, you know, maybe our vision is that it's, you know, the Korean grocers are kind of serious and you feel a feeling. And he listened to me when nothing was made. And then about 2 months later, I was going into my local Korean Grocers Association store, and all the employees had smile buttons. They had the smile buttons that they had put on their jackets and everything. So this is the area where you're bordering on what's in good taste and what's not. But there was an element of truth. There was an element of truth to it, and it changed.
At this time in the 1980s, you played a lot of love interest and love story, but in some movies they gave you like the craziest women. I mean, whether Sharon Stone, the serial killer with an ice pick, or the totally crazy boss as Demi Moore in Disclosure, and of course Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction. Why was that? Why was it like? Why was it putting you with all this?
You know, I think it had to do with a sense of feeling that the sexes were not comfortable with each other. Just feeling that there was a conflict and a balance going on that didn't make it, that I sensed it wasn't a comfort factor involved. And it goes back actually all the way back to Cuckoo's Nest. Because in Cuckoo's Nest, there's the part of the big Nurse Ratched, which was a great part, but it was the villain. And we had 5 actresses, major actress stars, 5 actresses turned the part down. They didn't want to do it. Why? Because at that time, 1977, 78, in terms of where the women's movement was and everything else, it was not acceptable for a woman to be the villain. Actors, male actors, you always loved a good villain part. Those are the ones that really, you know, were really good to get by. And I remember going to a party after that movie with Anne Bancroft. She was married to Mel Brooks. Anne was a wonderful actress, was one of the people who turned that part down. And we were all talking about the movie and won a lot of Oscars. And at one point, she slugged her husband, Mel Brooks, and said, "I told you I should have done that movie. You told me to turn it down. It was your fault." But I think there was an unease that I liked, and with Fatal Attraction, it was just a great, simple setup. You know, what is your worst nightmare? All right? If you're going to cheat, what is your worst nightmare? So everybody sort of understood, you know, that whole story. Basic Instinct was much more, that was the early 90s, and I wanted to do a slam dance, just a slam dance. We wanted to do a tough ass, and if any of you know Paul Verhoeven's work, Paul's a good old-fashioned Dutch Calvinist, you know, who's fighting his background, his religious upbringing as a young man. And we just wanted to hit something. And we had a good script, and we had just a fabulous actress in Cher, and she was just perfect for the role. Again, it was very funny. We were auditioning, trying to find the right actress for the part. And Paul knew there was going to be a lot of active sex as there is in a lot of his films. So when he would meet these actresses, he would always preface it by saying, yeah, but there'll be nudity, nudity, much, lot of nudity. I said, Paul, you don't have to say that, man. So we kept getting turned down by actresses who had no trouble showing their breasts or anything in film, but were like, Paul. And then I was over here in Europe, and he sent me the audition tape. He played my part in the scene with Sharon, and she was spectacular. She was really good and did a wonderful job. And this was before they have now, they're called intimate coaches. Now you can't do anything unless you have an intimate coach. But back then, and I'm proud of the fact, my history with women in films have given, most of them have given their best performances, whether it was Louise Fletcher or Kathleen Turner or Annette Bening in American President or all of them, so a lot of them. So we worked on it, and the secret, I guess, since I become the expert on sex scenes in movies, is rehearsal. Is that you have to, like you do a fight scene, you have to work out the choreography. You work out the choreography. In fight scenes, when you do that, you know, okay, I throw a punch, boom, you go back, and you come back, you throw a boom, and you start very slowly, and then you work your way up to a faster pace. Well, the same thing, and particularly if you're doing a love scene, it's important for the lady that you're not taking advantage. So you tell them beforehand when you're starting, all right, I'm gonna put my hand here, all right? Okay, you put your hand here, and then we're gonna go kiss, kiss, and then we're gonna boom, and then we're gonna go down, and you start slow, and then you go, and then the fight action is, and if you're successful, it looks like, oh, it's all impulsive and it never happened, but it's very well choreographed. But I do remember there's another actress who was very good in that picture named Jean Triplehorn, who played my psychiatrist. And we had a scene, and we were looking at our call sheet, which is what you get for your next day's work, everything that's required and needed. And Jean is looking at the call sheet. She goes, 12 pairs of rip-away panties? What is this? Well, you'll see.